All right, thank you for everyone for joining us. My name is Landon Gates. I am a consultant for the Colorado Cattlemen's Association. I will be helping run the Zoom platform today, and will help field questions for Terry and the other speakers. We will have all of you muted, but as you're all probably familiar with Zoom now, you can type questions in the chat. We will be monitoring that. You can also push *6 to unmute yourself, I believe, if you're on your phone. And if you're on a computer, the mute as at the bottom left of the Zoom screen. This call will be recorded by the Cattlemen. And I've got a question in the chat about allowing everyone in the call to record so we can listen back for accuracy's sake. Yes, those of you that are tuned in, feel free to record. And if you need a recording of this afterward, we can make that available to you. So with that, I am going to introduce Terry Fankhauser. He is the Executive Director of the Colorado Cattlemen's, and he is going to kind of lead the discussion today and give you the perspective of the Cattlemen's Association. So Terry, take it away.
Thank you, Landon. Thank you for everybody that's joined us today. We appreciate and respect your time, and we'll move through this rather quickly today. I'm going to preface any remarks that I make that I'm especially pleased by the three landowners that have joined us today and their unique perspectives, and I'll introduce them as we move through their presentations. I'll make initial introductions, and then we'll move through each of them for some initial responses. Today's conversation is related to our organization and landowners' perspectives and thoughts related to the Colorado Oil and Gas Conservation Commission's recent announcement of considering 2,000+ foot setbacks to actually not just the wellhead, but the border of the well pad from yet to be disclosed components within the landscape, be it homes, be it roads, be it sensitive wildlife areas, be it waterways or otherwise. If we sound like we don't have all the details on this issue, it's because we don't, and which is in part why we're concerned about this unexpected rulemaking component. Obviously, we understand the rulemaking that's currently going on by the Colorado Oil and Gas Conservation Commission. I'd like to start by telling you a little bit about CCA and who we are and who we represent. We are the Colorado Cattlemen's Association. We're a trade association that represents cattle producers and landowners throughout Colorado. Our organization represents approximately 65 to 70% of the private land owners that raise livestock in this state, which is the vast majority of the private land in the state of Colorado, as well as interests on state lands and federal lands. We're a 150-year-old organization, plus it's actually about 153 years. And our commitment is to those beef producers, landowners, and the resources that we either own or are imparted with and been stewarded with. We do not come new to this conversation with the Colorado Oil and Gas Conservation Commission. We have participated historically in significant rulemakings, specifically rulemakings associated with waterways, water quality, air quality, and sensitive wildlife areas. We have held party status historically. We do not currently hold party status, as it was not our understanding that this existing rulemaking would go into setbacks that the voters recently overturned in Colorado with a supermajority of votes being cast saying that those increased setbacks weren't warranted, as they did not deliver additional public health and safety benefits. We come to you today because landowners and royalty owners were as equally as surprised as maybe the oil and gas community was. We have historically had a citizen COGCC. Now it's a quote unquote professional board. Those individuals, as you know, set on that board are compensated for their time. It's a full-time job. Ironically, there was no consideration and outreach to stakeholders like ourselves, which have a very demonstrative role in oil and gas placement activities as it relates to the private land that we utilize, nor did we receive any contact through our members and their representation as royalty owners. Property rights obviously are very important when we come to this issue of placement of wells and mineral interests when it comes to landowners. It goes without saying, and our position has remained firm as it relates to the Initiative 112 up until this proposed rulemaking, that things of this degree and this measure could very likely result in takings. Not only without consideration of compensation, which to our understanding isn't being discussed, but also due process. Due process as it stands in relation to this Oil and Gas Conservation Commission rulemaking. We do anticipate significant conflicts if setbacks are to be from 2,000 to 2,400 foot setbacks. Of course, 2,000 foot from the edge of the well pad, which if you consider the scale of the well pad, that's an additional 400 to 500 foot. We're actually talking about 2,000 to 2,400 foot setbacks from these oil and gas installations. That does affect our normal agricultural operations, where we might find an oil and gas drilling installation where we can seek variances today or actually consult with the oil and gas company for placement outside of our fields and our pastures, outside of our waterways. In this case, there will be very little, if any, variance process, and the placement of the wells, if you are lucky enough to find exploration taking place on your property because of the magnitude of these setbacks being difficult to place. We also, as landowners, have to consider also the sensitive wildlife areas, such as the work that we do around Gunnison sage-grouse and greater sage-grouse, and making sure that we're not putting installations within sage-grouse leks or other sensitive areas. Also, we have a network of waterways and irrigation ditches that we can't interrupt, as well as roads and other infrastructure on our property. All of this comes to bear with the question, does this add to additional health or safety benefit? It's come to our attention, and we've witnessed this, that several professionals and scientists in the area of analyzing air quality, amongst other issues, do not believe that there are significant safety benefits or health benefits greater than a 500-foot setback. Yet we're considering multiple 4 to 5-fold of that. We do not directly represent the oil and gas industry. We are mainly concerned about our private property rights and the royalty interests as it relates to agriculture. And we feel now is the time for us to stand up and let our voices be heard, as we have not been invited to nor included in that rulemaking process when such a significant issue was introduced as of recently. So with that and these introductory comments, I'd like to introduce 3 different landowners from different perspectives and different walks of life for some introductory comments. And then ultimately we will open this up for questions and answers. I'll give a brief bio of each individual first, and then we'll go in the same order as we've introduced folks with. So Susie Magnuson is the first producer on the Zoom call here we'd like to introduce. She's a Weld County rancher near Eaton, Colorado. Susie and her two sons operate a diversified farming and ranching business that often is bordered by homes, businesses, and other infrastructure. Susie successfully, and she'll speak to this, worked with drilling companies on placement and timing of drilling and ongoing activities on her land. And she's done that in consideration of her royalty interests and her farming interests, as well as her neighbors. Next, we'll hear from Tom Compton. Tom is a rancher and royalty owner from Hesperus, Colorado. Tom's a past president of the Colorado Cattlemen's Association, and he has served on a number of local, state, and national boards, including the Colorado Oil and Gas Commission as a landowner representative, of which there isn't an individual that serves in that capacity anymore. Tom has a really strong understanding of the historic work of the COGCC, including its environmental and safety regulations, along with landowner drilling and ongoing infrastructure siting. Lastly, we'll hear from Joe Wigington. Joe is a property owner in Weld County. He's a small acreage landowner. He's president of his HOA. He's a royalty owner, and his HOA also owns royalty. He resides near a wellhead, and he has carefully considered and researched the health and safety, which he'll go over, I'm sure, in his comments, because that is of the utmost imperativeness to his family. So with that, I would like to transition and introduce Susie Magnuson first. Have Susie make some contextual remarks related to herself and her operation, and her perspective related to this proposed setback ruling. Susie?
Thank you very much, Terry. And I guess I represent farmers, because that's basically what I do now. I lost my husband in 2008 to cancer. Prior to that, we had been approached by the oil and gas industry to lease our mineral rights. They were not going to drill on us at the time, but would we be willing to lease our mineral rights? And Ted took some time and he said, yes, we would be willing to do that. Little did we know that he would be diagnosed with cancer within 3 months of that. And the income from not only the lease, but from the oil that was produced and the gas that was produced from under our farm went to help pay for all of his medical bills, which at the time he was taking treatments every 3 weeks. And every time he sat down in the chemo chair, it was going to be $16,000. We had just, prior to his diagnosis, purchased the farm from his two sisters. And to say that we were poor is an understatement. But because of our ability to use the resources that we had, we were able to steward the land and also produce on the land and produce from under the land, so that at the time of his passing, I didn't owe anything on his medical bills. They had all been paid, and they'd been paid through several other ways, but also through the oil and gas. Later, I was approached about having wells drilled on my farm. This was due to the new directional drilling. I sat down and I did my homework. I looked at where they wanted to put the wells and said, no, that's not going to work, because not only do I own the mineral rights, I own the property on top of it. It's a farming operation. The Magnusons bought that farm in 1908, and there's been a Magnuson on that farm since then. And if we make foolish or uninformed decisions, we wouldn't be still in business. So we talked to them. I sat down with a field man. My sons were there, and we were able to talk to them as to where would be a good placement for it. And we ended up with 4 wells. Out of that, we were able to improve the farm. I was able to put in some pivots so that the water that we owned could be applied professionally and to the best of the ability. We had just come out of a drought, and now we've gone into another one, and being able to produce our crop using the water to its best use has been great. And in looking at some of the new questions, if the new rules, and I'm going to just go with the 2,000 feet, we would not be able to put another well on our farm. It's because it's a long, narrow farm. It's just not something that we could do. If they made an exception, we could put it right in the middle where the pivot is. That doesn't make any sense for us. When we first put our pivots or our wells in, I knew Mr. Compton, and I knew that I could call him if I had some questions. But at the same time, the oil and gas industry, their field man, I know him by his first name. He sat at my kitchen table and we discussed what our plan is and what their plan was, and they worked with us. And we were able to not only get the wells put in where we wanted them, but also all of the lines feeding out to the county road and then on further, so that we knew where everything was and it was where we wanted it to be. I want to just say, my grandchildren live there. I did my homework. It was not an uninformed or foolish decision. And I guess I would really say I resent the fact that somebody thinks that they know better than I do, a producer on the land, how to use the, just all of the substances that I am the caretaker for. So that's my story and I'm sticking to it.
Thank you, Susie. Now, Mr. Tom Compton, if you would care to make some remarks.
Thank you, Susie. Thank you, Terry, and thank you to the media folks that were willing to come and listen to us. As Terry said, I am a rancher in Southwest Colorado. We ran cow-calf operations. We had about 6 wells on our ranch. We were able to successfully negotiate with the oil and gas companies where those would be placed. So they would not be in the middle of a pasture, in the middle of a hay field, and of course that includes the access roads, not impacting ditch right-of-ways and so on. All of that was done through civil negotiation with the land people, and we were very happy with that. And we are a royalty owner, so we're very pleased to have that income. Susie has indicated certainly how valuable it was for her, not only in Ted's passing, but also in being able to make improvements on the ranch, on the farm. It's a very important source of revenue. Most of us, I think, in the cattle business in Colorado have youngsters that we encourage to go to college, and kind of like my children, I told them they should get into the absolute best college they could get into. Apparently misunderstood me. They thought best meant most expensive. So it cost a lot of money to put them through school. But since we had the royalty revenue, it was really, really beneficial. The work that I did on the Oil and Gas Commission a few years ago, obviously it's a little different now. We had an assignment to balance. That was our goal, to balance the use of the natural resources with protection of the natural resources, as well as protection of public health and safety. And we went through a rather rigorous process of establishing setbacks, and heard from a lot of people about the appropriateness of a certain number of feet or how these things would be determined. And the professional staff, COGCC staff, who are very good at what they do. They are professionals, and they know what they're doing. They made their recommendations. We discussed those with them and accepted those, because they do know what they're doing. I'm really disappointed that, in fact, this current professional commission apparently has not given due credit to the professional staff on the commission and what they recommend, what they think is appropriate. Of course, I was really disappointed that, this kind of came out of nowhere. We didn't even know they were going to do new setback regulations until whatever it was, a week or two ago. We heard about it, and we don't understand all of the ins and outs, but which I think we have a right to know. What exactly are these setbacks going to mean? When you basically take land out of consideration, then that leaves less land to be considered for the placement of a gas well, and you only have so much land where you're not going to be able to impact your farming and ranching operation, by the presence of the oil and gas activity. So, we really would hope that the new commissioners would truly do due diligence and include input from landowners as to how they see these proposed setbacks impacting them. Well, we'll let it go at that. I just comment in passing that had the commissioners said that you're going to extend setbacks for the school children and for playgrounds and hospitals, it probably wouldn't have raised very many eyebrows. But when you really are covering a huge amount of land, when you consider what the impact it would have statewide, basically take it out of production as far as oil and gas is concerned, really have a big impact on a lot of landowners, and certainly the cattle people in the state of Colorado. And my wife and I are at retirement age, so we're going to be even more dependent on royalty revenue. And I really am concerned that, from what I read, that these increased setback regulations are going to make it nigh unto impossible for many companies to be able to drill, to continue their work. And I can't help but have noticed over the last few months companies that have declared bankruptcy and gone out of business. I have no idea how that would impact royalties. I know the judge that looks at those cases has a lot of discretion, and we don't know if that would impact. If the judge says you don't have to pay those royalties anymore, that would really be a difficult pill for us to swallow. So I'll leave it at that, Terry, and the rest of you folks, and try to answer any questions you might have. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Tom. Mr. Joe Wigington, please.
Yes, thank you very much. Very nice to meet all of you. Again, my name is Joe Wigington. I am a Colorado native, born and raised in Denver, graduate of Manual High School, and I spent the next 30 years pursuing a dream of moving out of Metro Denver area, so that I could move into a rural area and experience more of an urban or a rural lifestyle. So I've managed to locate a nice small property here in Meade, Colorado. It did include the mineral rights, and after a few years, those royalties started producing revenue for me and my family, and consequently our community and adjacent communities, because we all were impacted by the ability to lease these mineral rights. So it's interesting because it was very timely opportunity for us. My daughter was diagnosed with a serious medical condition, and so she's going to live with that forever. Consequently, the financial strain, both from medical expenses, and she's now going into college. As Tom suggested, it's a very costly endeavor. But without the royalty revenue, I don't know what we would do. So it's very, very important for us now and in the future. I will also mention that as the HOA president, we have about 10 acres of common area. And so the entire community benefits from these royalties as well. Keeps our HOA dues down. It also allows us to maintain the water quality in a pond that we all share, as well as beautification projects and other maintenance. So it's really valuable for this community too. Most of the members of this community are retiring here, as I plan to do as well. And then finally, the third cross section that I bring is that I am a stone's throw from a producing oil well just across County Road 7 here. I can see it from my window. And before I moved in here, I took that into serious consideration and did an enormous amount of research. My sister is a lifelong employee of the Environmental Protection Agency, so she resides in Washington. I leveraged her and a lot of EPA studies, to make the decision about moving here as far as the emissions, the noise, the traffic, odor. And I'm here to tell you, none of the things that we hear horror stories about, I have any concern with. I've been here for several years now, and I'm quite comfortable living near a well. However, that makes for an interesting predicament because even though my producing well is about 3/4 of a mile away, I reside close enough, several hundred feet away from a producing well, which means these new setbacks could have a significant impact in the future of development on my property, future expansion of the well across the road here, and the future expansion of the well that's producing for our community and that I receive royalties from. So the security and risk of my future is now very ambiguous. It's uncertain, and it's not why I moved here. Part of what I spent my entire life doing was mitigating risk, elevating the certainty, and I plan to retire here. So, this is actually fairly devastating that they're even considering this. And all that said, that's exactly why I voted against Proposition 112. I knew what I was doing. Colorado voters are extremely well informed. It's why they voted against it. And it doesn't appear that the commission is actually taking any of my concerns into consideration. So I will end with this. As a voter, taxpayer, real property owner, and a representative of my community, I am outraged that the commission I'm outraged at the way the commission is handling this topic. My hope is that they will take the time, listen to our concerns, and reconsider. With that, I will say thank you and hand it back over to Landon and Terry.
Great. Thank you, Joe. Thank you, Tom, Susie, and Terry as well. We're going to go ahead and open this up for questions from anybody that has some. And I see that Mike Lee with E&E News has posted several questions in the chat. Mike, would you like to ask your questions directly of the panelists, or I can certainly take your questions and pose them to the panelists as well. And it looks like he's on mute. So I will go ahead and ask. His first question is that it sounds like most of the landowners already have production on their land. Are you worried the sites won't be grandfathered, such as that you'd lose out on future oil and gas production? Tom, do you have any thoughts on that?
Very quickly, I don't, I should have learned in my 80 years to never say never, but I can't believe you could ever grandfather all the current sites under this setback regulation. So I don't see that as a potential problem. Now, could happen, you never know, I guess, but I'm not overly worried about the grandfathering in current sites. In terms of future oil and gas production, for sure, if in fact companies would like to drill, have found a way to drill where they think they can access more gas or oil, but the setback would prohibit that. And sure, I would absolutely lose out on any future royalty. So that does concern me.
Excellent. And Mike, if you have any follow-up questions, you can certainly let me know that as well. But Mike's second question is, and maybe Susie, I will let you take this question. The setback proposal allows for variances if property owners agree. Will that give you, the owners, enough flexibility to permit new sites?
I don't think so. Maybe it's that I don't trust that when you go from the 500 to 2,000 after the voters have voted it down, when you ask for a variance, and it would be to probably less than 500, I don't know that it would be granted. And one of the things I forgot to mention is at the time that we signed the new lease, I was told that if Proposition 112 went to defeat, they would come back and start talking about adding 8 more wells at the wellhead that we have. So those definitely, until this is all settled, are off the table.
Got it. Excellent. Thank you, Susie. Mike's next question, he says, Terry, you mentioned that there's no scientific evidence for setbacks greater than 500 feet. And then he asks, can we live with a 500-foot setback?
Yeah, Landon, I think I also add a statement there that related to variances is that the commissioners have indicated they're considering whether to allow variances or waivers to any such setback. And we know that we've had those. Susie indicated that's taken place, but some commissioners are calling this a soft setback that they would consider. And the concern is that during their deliberations, they said that the waivers would be few and very far in between and nearly unattainable. Few, far between, and nearly unattainable. So even with the setbacks that we currently have today, and we do have setbacks, we have setbacks for wildlife, and a number of other things. And Mr. Compton referenced that prior commissions have struggled with those and made diligent decisions at that point in time. I think we're all willing, as Tom indicated, to consider reasonable setbacks. But what we're talking about here today with a 2,400-foot setback, and I know everybody doesn't speak in acreage or anything else, necessarily along those lines like landowners do or have a sense of it. We're talking about 415 acres or approximately 314 football fields of area when we look at the setback that's being considered in all directions from an oil and gas well pad, not just the head of the well, but the well pad. So, we have considered increased setbacks before. We found middle ground. I think a conversation would be in order, but anything of this magnitude is so egregious, so significant. I'll be the first to say that it really is it really is a moratorium, a permanent moratorium, as long as the rules in place to future oil and gas development in Colorado.
Landon, may I make just a couple brief comments?
Absolutely, Tom.
When we were considering setbacks a few years ago in the commission, um, well, actually, we'll just go back to the 2,500 foot setback proposal that was defeated by the electorate, by the voters. It was estimated at that time that that would take out of potential production about 85% of private lands, of non-federal lands, about 85%. Now, man, that is a huge amount of land that would not be available for oil and gas drilling. Now, I realize this is a 2,000 or 2,400 foot de facto setback, but I bet you that percentage is not much below that, even with the little bit of difference in the setback proposals. So you're going to really take a lot of land out of potential production. In terms of variances, my experience with variances has been, number one, that basically is going to create a huge amount of work for the farmer and rancher, for the families to try to probably have to hire an attorney to figure out the kind of language they need in order to request a setback, and to go through whatever amount of time it would take, 3 months, 6 months, a year, or whatever, to get a variance approved, even if it does get approved. And so, I'm not overly enthusiastic about soft setbacks or variances that, as Terry kind of indicated, someone had said would be pretty dang hard to get. So while I certainly appreciate that offer, so to speak, and I think that has to be on the table no matter what happens, I don't see that as really being a way to offer much mitigation to the proposed setback. Thank you.
Thank you. Joe, a question for you, and this is Mike's last question that I have at the moment. He asks or says, the governor and the new COGCC seem to be driven by concern about other folks living near oil and gas sites. There are a lot of homeowners in the Front Range who are worried about explosions, fires, health risks from drilling sites. What would you say to folks like that?
That's a very reasonable question. And I think my answer would be, come out here, check it out for yourself. I welcome you into my home, and you can look out my window and see the well nearest, and then another one that's the one that's nearest is well within several hundred feet. You can't even tell it's really there. The technology is actually fantastic. So from a noise standpoint, from a health standpoint, traffic standpoint, these are issues that I'm not seeing. Now, from a safety standpoint, I think a lot of people are just driven by fear, especially with the explosion in Firestone. Of course, that was an issue with well capping. So, not even relevant to actually producing well. And so I think what people need to do is just gather information. I think I personally have no concerns living right next to a well, producing well. And, I invite people to come out and have a look and do additional research. That's the key. I think a lot of people are driven by fear or lack of understanding. But, I think that is, that's my stance. Does that answer your question, Mike, adequately?
So he may take a little bit to reply. He was having some audio issues, so asked that I go ahead and ask his questions for him, but we'll see if he enters something.
Let me comment just briefly, if you would, Landon, on Mike's question. And I don't mean this to be interpreted as throwing Joe and other folks that live in Weld County or Boulder County or Larimer County or whatever But one of the problems we faced in Colorado, whether it's in legislation or in rulemakings, regulations, is we just have a tendency for this one size will fit the entire state of Colorado. Come up with one rule, one regulation, one new law, and it can apply equally to everyone all over the state. You know, there are a lot of ranching families that live what I will call in the Colorado outback. And you know, I think that commissioners need to take a look at those things. What impacts or potentially impacts folks that live in the Longmont area or Greeley area or whatever is a little bit different than what it might in the San Luis Valley or even down here in Southwest Colorado, you know, where we're just a little more rural here. Although it's changing a little bit as the days go by, I don't think you can really come up with one regulation that fits every part of Colorado. Wish they would at least consider that. And Joe already told you about the, you know, that terrible tragedy of the explosion that killed people and destroyed homes, which was basically a flow line problem. The flow lines weren't properly regulated. They weren't, when they were shut down, they weren't either cleaned and capped appropriately. And that's what caused that. It was a flow line problem, and the commission addressed that. And they came up with a new set of regulations to ensure that when flow lines are abandoned, they're abandoned appropriately. Thank you for letting me interrupt, Landon.
Not a problem, Tom. Susie, Dennis Huspeni, and I apologize, Dennis, if I haven't pronounced your last name right. Dennis Huspeni is with the Denver Gazette. And Susie, he asks if the wells on your property are within 2,000 foot of houses and or other dwellings or buildings.
Within 2,000 feet? Is that the question?
Yes.
Yes, they are. They're within 500 feet of two of my grandkids. And cattle corrals, buildings, but they're within 500 feet of the home. So yes, they are.
Got it. Thank you, Susie. Maybe Terry, a question for you from Brian Almer with the Barn Radio Network. He asks, is this 2,000 foot setback rule just part of what Governor Polis meant in his Denver Post op-ed in August when he said he would oppose any ballot initiative from voters to overturn Senate Bill 181 and veto any legislative attempts to overturn 181 until at least 2022, I believe. And then he says until it's quote unquote fully implemented. Do you have any thoughts on that? He also then kind of poses the question, what else does the Polis administration have within Senate Bill 181 that none of us know about? And I'm not sure if you want to speculate on that last part or not, but.
I probably can't speculate on the last part. I would say it's interesting that the COGC, the professional COGCC, are not considering the advice of even COGC staff on setbacks, and apparently disregarding the governor's statement of his opposition to an arbitrary fracking ban, which is a lot to do with setbacks, right? And that activity that takes place. So I don't know if the governor, I can't speak for the governor, if the governor was as surprised to hear about this arbitrary 2,000 foot setback as we were. I would call upon the governor that if this is not what he anticipated and isn't what he impined when he talked about arbitrary bans, fracking bans through setbacks, that he actually address his commission and set them straight, because We know that his administration, his staff has not made those recommendations, and in fact, contrary. But at the end of the day, these are individuals that are appointed. They are professional commissioners that receive a salary and have at least 8 hours a day to contemplate these issues. So, I'm not going to speculate, what else is in that piece of legislation or not. I think what we're seeing here is a commission that not only has not gone through due process, but maybe needs a bit of clarity on the direction related to the rulemaking that they currently have underway.
Thank you, Terry. Mike Lee, again with E&E News, asked to go back to the question of whether or not landowners could live with a 500-foot setback, which is the current setback, except that I think there's an additional setback of 1,000 feet from high occupancy buildings. So maybe Joe, Tom, and Susie, if each of you can maybe answer yes or no. I'm not sure if any of you want to go into further explanation or detail, but can you live with a 500-foot setback?
Yeah, this is Joe. I certainly can and do, consequently currently. So I'm very comfortable with it. Not only am I comfortable with it, but I'm comfortable leaving this property and the mineral rights and the current state and proximity of the existing wells to my daughter and her, when she has her own children. So I'm very comfortable with that.
I would just add, Landon, yes, we have learned to live with that. So, yeah, we could live with that.
I guess I'm the same way.
Okay, excellent. Dennis Huspeni again with the Denver Gazette says the 2,000-foot setback rule has not been adopted permanently, or has not yet been adopted permanently, as none of the rules under consideration are. Is this true? Terry, maybe you want to take that, but as far as I understand, that is correct, but the commission is about to wrap up presentations from the public and then go into deliberation, but maybe you can expand on that more.
Yeah, Landon, I believe you're correct. In short, absolutely. There hasn't been final action, and I think that's in large part why we're reaching out and making sure that, and we appreciate to what extent the media can assist with this, but making sure that those considerations, the landowners and others that might have similar concerns before the rule is finalized is in fact correct. And this has been a long process, right? This is at an open record of not a few days, but 2 months. So it's been quite a process. I guess the question I have is it truly nearing the end of that process, or because of the requirement for due diligence, which I assume is a requirement, and stakeholder engagement, and consideration of such issues of gravity, we believe that we need to have an opportunity to engage as part of that formal record and formal rulemaking process at this point in time, because this is a substantive addition to the scope of what was to be considered by this rulemaking in our understanding.
Got it. Thank you. And I was just looking at some of my notes that I had written down, and I had written down that I think the commission plans to finalize the rules toward the end of October, early November, with an effective date of 12/1, so December 1st of this year, I believe. Going back to Brian Ulmer with the Barn Radio Network, who makes the final decision, the COGCC Or will it have to go in front of the state legislature next session, or does Governor Polis have to sign off on this rule? Terry, I may let you take that question again. I believe.
Yeah, I mean, Landon, you know as well as I do, the enabling legislation give direction to COGCC, not only in the reconstitution of COGCC, but the consideration of and scope to some extent, or direction for some additional rulemaking. It's my understanding that unless there's something, and that would actually probably have to go to court or something else along those lines, the regulatory authority is imparted to the agency to make this decision and to approve this rulemaking. So I don't anticipate that having to be a touchback, but that all being said, it's likely that the General Assembly on issues of great controversy in any regulatory body will likely take up the issue again. So we'll just all have to wait and see about that.
Yeah, and I will just add that every year the legislature considers and generally passes as a formality what is called the Rule Review Bill, which includes all the rules and regulations that have been promulgated by every state agency during the interim. Again, that is largely a formality, so I would assume that these rules would be included in that rule review bill, but I would certainly have to check on that for sure. Dan, I'm not sure if it's Mika or Micah, but he is with BizWest Media out of Fort Collins. He asks, there's a difference between the COGCC's proposal of a 2,000-foot setback and the 500 feet that's in current rule. Generally, where might be a compromise that would allow for more distance from wells being acceptable for landowners? Susie, you just went through this. In citing wells, do you want to take that question?
Can you ask that again? Because I'm not sure I understand the question.
Yeah, so
I can just ask directly.
Perfect. Go ahead, Dan.
Yeah. Yeah, Susan. So right now, across the entire state, there's a 500 foot setback for all wells in general, and what the COGCC is proposing is just extending that essentially to 2,000 feet. So obviously, there's a very large gap between those numbers. Is there a compromise here that the CCA and landowners might be comfortable with, for example, raising it to 750 feet or 1,000 feet, or some other kind of increment like that? Is there a level where you as a landowner would feel comfortable in taking that, where it strikes the balance between health and safety of the public and your rights as the landowner?
I think where I would come down is I would need to see scientific proof that changing the distances makes a difference in safety and health. Does that make sense? 500 feet has worked, and it does allow for the placement of wells closer to corners so that not as much land is taken out of production. And to move it, I guess I'm asking, why do we need to move it? And I think I would reiterate what Tom said. I can understand making it farther distance from a town, from a playground, from a hospital, that kind of thing. But I live in a rural area, and it's not going to impact other people, or it's my family that is making an informed decision. So I guess I just need to know why we need to change it for health and safety reasons.
I might follow up with Susie just a little bit. Susie, I think you said that well, but let me also draw attention to the fact that we also, as landowners, shouldn't be guilty of an arbitrary setting of a number. Because if I were to say a number today, it would just be pulling it out of thin air. Susie's right when she says that there's a number of health and safety considerations that go into it, but it's an entire process that, having gone through it personally, with setbacks, that when Mr. Compton was on the Oil and Gas Commission with wildlife and water, there were so many different things that we had to consider, implications that we had to consider, and balance. So I'm not prepared. I don't think landowners are prepared to give a number. I think landowners are prepared to say, justify a number, justify where we're not doing a good job today. I would argue that Colorado has some of the safest regulations related to air quality, noise, and certainly care for our wildlife, which we're intimately concerned about because landowners participate in conservation activity, and we depend on water, good quality water and availability of water. So to come up with a number today, I think would be us being equally irresponsible. Moving on to the next question, if I might, Landon. Dan, really a good question, and I appreciate the question. Barbara Kirkmeyer's comments related to Weld County being willing to sue the state on procedural grounds if they're outside of their formal process. Would CCA consider suing the COGC or state if it implements a 2,000-foot setback? I know this will come as great surprise to all of you, but our members are intimately concerned about a number of things, one of which is their property rights. And it is very difficult to prove a takings in Colorado, but something this egregious, without footing and without process, I think would have our members, and this is how we operate as a grassroots organization, taking that direction from our members and from our leadership. I think they would seriously consider the magnitude of the impact that they would feel from this, the takings that they possibly would feel without compensation, and would very seriously consider the question about intervening into a lawsuit. We have not conversed about that. Our board of directors, this is a new issue. I traveled the state last week on 14 meetings throughout Colorado, trying to rally rural Colorado to be positive and forthright about their engagement with metropolitan Colorado lawmakers, agency personnel in a constructive way for the betterment of Colorado, because we are all Colorado. And this was one of the additional issues that was brought up at almost every one of those meetings. So I know it's top of mind to our members. And when something like this is that top of mind, they expect action out of us as an organization. We're not prepared to say yes to that today. We much prefer a solid, diligent, meaningful regulatory process. It is in nobody's interest but the attorney to sue. We much prefer to engage with COGCC and DNR immediately to find solutions to this issue as a pragmatic way of rulemaking for the citizens of Colorado and for our landowner community.
Great, thanks, Terry. I have one more question in the queue from Dennis Hispani, again with the Denver Gazette. And he is asking Tom, when you were the COGCC chair.
Excellent question. And if I had memory worth a darn, I'd tell him, but I don't remember. It was during Governor Hickenlooper's, I would say his first term as governor, right in there somewhere, but I don't know the exact time frame. I remember he gently twisted my arm to serve an extra year. So it's somewhere in there, somewhere in that.
Tom, 2008, I think, rings a bell for me.
Good bill here.
Gotcha. Good. Well, we are now at the 1 hour mark. I'll open it up for any additional questions from anybody that may have questions. You can either unmute yourself again on the bottom left or *6, I believe, or you can type a question in the chat. And it doesn't look like there are any additional questions coming in. I will offer to those of you from the media that if you would like to do any additional follow-up with Terry or any of the speakers from today, we'd be happy to facilitate that. You have my email as well as cell phone number from the advisory that was sent out. So feel free to reach out if you'd like to do any follow-up there. Again, Tom, thank you. Susie, thank you. Joe, thank you. And Terry, thank you. Terry, I don't know if you have any closing comments that you want to make on behalf of CCA, but if you do, give you that time to do that.
I don't. I just want to say thank you to everybody that participated, specifically landowners today, and that we appreciate individual members of the media listening, understanding landowners' perspective on issues. And with that, thank you for hosting, Landon, and we bid everyone a good day.
Thank you.
Thanks. Bye, everyone.